Hello everyone, and welcome to the KISSER International COVID-19 Seminar Series. My name is Bassam Shhaibar, and I will be your host and moderator throughout the KICS program, where we aim to present and shed light on the pandemic through a global lens. Today's episode will explore the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on research activities and innovation. I have the honor of introducing our invited expert on this topic, Dr. Zwerazar Kovachevich. Dr. Kovachevich is Director of the Research Office at the Faculty of Medicine, Nursing and Health Sciences at Monash University in Melbourne, Australia. He has a research background in molecular and microbiology. In 2008, he joined Pfizer, where he led projects to develop veterinary and livestock vaccines. 3 years later, he became the Australian-based representative of the UK Global Science and Innovation Network. So, without further ado, let's hear what Dr. Kovachevich has to say.
Thank you to everybody. Thank you, Dr. Bassam, and thank you to the Kuwait Institute for Scientific Research for this opportunity to be here today and speak with you all. I'd also like to acknowledge His Excellency Jonathan Gilbert, Australia's Ambassador to Kuwait, for his ongoing support. I appreciate it very much. So, as Dr. Bassam mentioned, I'm the Director of the Faculty Research Office at the Faculty of Medicine, Nursing and Health Sciences at Monash University, which, for those that don't know, is located in Melbourne, Australia, at the southern coast of Australia. And I've been invited here to address you all today to talk about an issue which has really shaken the world, and that's COVID-19. More specifically, how it's going to impact and how it has impacted the research sector in Australian universities. It's quite a sad story. It's quite a negative story. Our universities in Australia have been hit very hard by this for reasons that will become clear throughout the presentation. But I thought I would lighten the mood a little bit at the end by also talking about other things that we do in the Middle East region, and also some of the projects that we're leading on in terms of tackling the COVID-19 pandemic and hopefully providing solutions to the world. Now I'm having technical difficulties. Thank you. Okay, so what I've shown here on this slide is a snapshot of all of Australia's universities. We have about 40 universities. Most of them are publicly funded by the Australian government, and Monash itself belongs to this group of universities, which I've shown on the left-hand side of the screen, which is known as the Group of 8. Now, the Group of 8 represents Australia's largest and most research-intensive universities, and together the Group of 8 attracts over 70% of Australia's publicly funded competitive research grants and scholarships. So really the bulk of the grant-funded research is in these 8 institutions. That's not to diminish the contribution of all of the other universities, but really I just want to mention the Group of 8 here because Monash is a member of these 8 institutions. So we're very proud of our universities in Australia. Overall, they perform very well in the international ranking surveys. In the latest surveys, so we're talking about Times Higher Education, the Shanghai ranking and QS, Australia boasts 6 or 7 universities in the top 100. And all of these 6 or 7 are sourced from the Group of 8. So it really is the sort of research intensive leadership group for Australian universities. In terms of the economic impact of Australia's universities, they're a very important contributor to economic development in Australia. It's estimated that every $1 invested in higher education research and development can be linked back to a $5 return to our national GDP. So it's a 5-fold return on the investment. Just as a note here, from memory, one Kuwaiti dinar is 4.5 Australian dollars, just to keep the conversion in mind. What I've tried to show you here is a little bit of scale and context about our universities, just to give you an idea of how big they are as an employer and how many students we actually host at Australia's 40 or so universities. Universities are a major employer. They have over 125,000 staff. And as you can see from the figure, close to 40%, or roughly 50,000 people, are employed directly in the research space. So we're talking research only staff and those that have academic responsibilities that cover both teaching and research. About 50,000 people. In terms of students, Australia's universities host over 1.6 million students, both postgraduate and undergraduate. The rough split, looking at 2019 figures, is that about a third of our students are international students and 2/3 are domestic. And this will be important when I go into the rest of the presentation in terms of the university budget impacts, implications. About a third of the students are postgraduate students, and of these we have about 59,000 PhD students, that is doctoral students by research. Add to this about 8,000 masters by research students, and you see that we're approaching about 60,000 postgraduate research students. So taken together, combining the research active students with research active staff, that's over 100,000 active researchers across Australia's 40 universities. Bearing in mind that this is universities, and I'm excluding organisations such as independent research institutes, government research bodies like the CSIRO, industry, and so on. So this is universities only. And the chart on the right is just looking at the level of investment in terms of research. According to 2018 figures, you can see that 30 to 40% of research investment goes towards biomedical and clinical health sciences and biological sciences. There's also a major part of the funding going towards engineering and environmental sciences and social, behavioural, and economic sciences. I have to admit, when I was looking at this chart, it surprised me that the enabling sciences like the mathematical, information and computing sciences and the physical sciences accounted for a relatively small slice of the national pie. I think that's an area where Australia can frankly do better because these sciences, they're not really seen as at the coalface of translation and impact, but they're absolutely critical when it comes to fundamental blue sky research. What we're here to talk about today is, of course, COVID-19. It's a global catastrophe. There's no other way around it. And the pandemic has disrupted so many parts of our daily lives and laid bare the vulnerabilities of our society in terms of health, social systems and economic systems. And that impact has become really clear several months after the pandemic has started. Universities in particular have been hit very hard, and the situation has really exposed vulnerabilities in the way that Australian research is funded and carried out. And the universities are experiencing a major financial crisis because of COVID. This has many flow-on effects because, of course, money funds everything, and we're not likely to return to the levels where we were a couple of years ago until at least, I would say, 2025. And we'll go through some data demonstrating that next. So what I'm presenting on this chart is some data that was generated by the University of Melbourne Centre for the Study of Higher Education in a report released this year. It shows the level of investment that Australia's universities put into research from 2008 until 2018. You can see that it's steadily increasing year on year, which is a good thing. But there are a couple of things I want to draw to your attention. The blue component of each column refers to Australian government block funding. So this is a block of money that universities receive from the federal government every year based on their performance and their size and so on. The grey boxes represent external funding, and this includes things like external competitive grants, contracts, philanthropy, and so on. That's how much is devoted to research per year. And it's this pink category that I really want to spend some time on. This is what we're going to be referring to as discretionary funding. A lot of this discretionary funding comes from international student fee income. Now, you saw in a chart earlier that about a third of our students are international students. And based on estimates, 50 to 60% of this pink funding, this discretionary funding, comes directly from international student fee income. And you could see that over time, universities have been increasing its spending based on this discretionary funding source, whereas the other two funding sources have remained relatively static. Indeed, between 2008 and 2018, discretionary funding has more than doubled in terms of the amount put into investment in research. What that means is that our research effort at universities fundamentally depends on income that we receive from international students coming to Australia and studying at our universities. And this, as you can imagine, is a problem. From the same group, we've got some modelling which tries to show what that problem actually is going to look like over the next 5 years. So what this group have done, have taken the 2018 level of discretionary funding available to universities to spend on research, which they estimate was approximately $3.1 billion, and projected the losses to this funding and how it impacts the funding available between 2020 and 2024. And what you'll see here, that revenue losses over that period come to about $7 billion collectively. So these are these pink bars. This is the amount of money which is lost because of the loss of international student income. And this is the money that's remaining. So this year, universities are projected to lose about $1.2 billion. It's going to be even worse next year, then a little bit better and a gradual recovery up until the middle of the decade. So you can see what I was saying earlier here, that the recovery in terms of our discretionary funding available for research will not be anywhere near what it was in 2018 until about 2025. More startlingly, the same modelling paper predicts that because of this loss of discretionary income, research staff will be reduced between 5,000 to 6,000 full-time equivalent positions. So that's 5,000 to 6,000 jobs being lost out of the research sector, which equates to a loss of nearly 11% in the research workforce. So quite a significant cut. As you can see, the financial situation is dire, and it raises all sorts of questions about the funding models that universities need to adapt to adopt to carry out research in future. So that's the university financial perspective. What do the researchers think? They think a lot, it turns out. There's an organisation in Australia called Research Australia, which is a not-for-profit organisation that represents research-intensive institutions. And they ran a survey earlier this year of health and medical researchers, where over 1,200 researchers responded and gave their thoughts about how the COVID situation has impacted their research activities and their future. And I'm going to go through some of the more interesting findings in that report now. So if we look at this chart, this is looking at the immediate effects of the COVID situation on health and medical researchers, bearing in mind that health and medical researchers, like any other workers, have been required to adhere to social distancing rules, working from home where possible. We've already spoken about the closure of borders and how this has affected researchers in terms of mobility, seeing collaborators, finding new collaborators and so on, as well as a lack of new international PhD students coming to the labs. 80% of the people who responded to the survey reported that their research has been negatively affected by COVID-19. So a very large proportion. On top of this 80%, a further close to 10% reported that the research is not yet affected, but they expected it would be. So we're really talking about 90% of responders saying that COVID is going to disrupt their research. And the chart on the left is giving you a few examples of some of the things that have really affected these researchers. Over half were unable to continue their research remotely. Obviously, in health and medical research, you need to access laboratories and infrastructure to do the work. And in many cases, that has been severely limited, depending on which part of Australia you're in. They can't commence or continue recruitment of research participants. And what I'm talking about here is clinical trials. You can't recruit patients into new clinical trials because of the COVID restrictions. There's no safe way to interact with research participants in these clinical trials. Travel restrictions have interrupted activity. They can't gain access to various infrastructure sites or collaborator sites. I've talked about the higher degree research students or PhD students and their restrictions as when it comes to coming into work, as well as things like interruptions to supplies, interruptions due to remote teaching responsibilities. You have to remember that with everyone at home, a lot of academics have been forced to go fully online with their lectures and their coursework. And for many, this has been a very steep learning curve and one that has taken away a lot of time from their research work. Monash also prides itself on having many researchers which also work as active clinicians in hospitals and clinics. And because of the situation in hospitals, they've had to spend more time attending to medical situations and away from the research lab, which has really taken away from their time to conduct research. So the next slide is looking at a little bit more longer term view of what's going to happen beyond 2020. The respondents to the survey, about 70% of them expect that their research outcomes will be affected beyond this year, with a further 22% not being sure. So really we're talking a very high degree of uncertainty about the future of their research. Of the 70% who expect their research to be affected, the biggest impacts are listed on the right-hand side of the screen. And you can see some examples. Just about all of the respondents expected delays in project milestones. Many expected delays in publications, and not only delays in publications, but also an overall reduction in publications. And this is obviously going to impact researchers' track record greatly and their ability to bring in new grants. There's a lot of concern about the overall reductions in funding available, and that's largely because governments have been under serious budgetary pressure from the COVID-19 situation. Governments have invested a lot of money into supporting other industries through this period. Universities are quite dismayed that they're not one of these institutions which aren't being specifically supported through general packages in the government. Other things include loss of staff, which I've already spoken about, inability to complete current projects, and temporary or permanent loss of lab and research materials. So these are really affecting them in the next few years. I think one of the emerging issues that we really need to think about is this idea of a significant loss of research talent. I mentioned earlier that 5,000 to 6,000 full-time equivalent jobs could be lost in the next 5 years because of the loss in discretionary research funding. This could really result in an emerging catastrophe, which we call a lost generation of researchers. Because of these significant savings, researchers will be forced to look at other career paths. They're going to lose their jobs, they're going to have to leave research because the entire university research sector is under the same pressure. based on a study published by the Group of 8, approximately 4,000 research staff are on fixed-term contracts which are going to expire between the end of this year and March 2021. Most of these will be fairly junior research assistant, young postdoctoral fellows, and other early career researchers. So really the people who are at the very beginning of their research careers are very vulnerable at the moment and are at the greatest risk of leaving the field completely. Resources for funding PhD students through scholarships and stipends, as well as resources for supporting early career researchers, will be greatly diminished because of the financial situation. And again, this means that we can't support emerging talent. Researchers will probably then move into other careers or industries, or even leave the country and go to other countries which may offer more support for early career researchers. So governments really need to make an effort to invest in career support to make sure that they keep research talent in Australia, to attract new talent, to maintain quality. Quality, of course, brings reputation, which translates into the rankings that we all follow so closely. And obviously quality will deliver research translation and impact.
5 minutes, doctors. 5 minutes.
Yes, I'm reaching the end here, so thank you. So what has actually improved? It's not all doom and gloom. Some things have actually been noted by the researchers to actually be better during COVID. So one thing that was observed was this sense of collaboration, both within their own organisations and across similar organisations and dissimilar organisations, has increased. You can see that collaboration with their own organisation has increased about 30%. Improved for about 30% of respondents. Collaboration across similar organisations has also improved for almost 20% of respondents, as well as collaboration with the similar organisations. And what this is saying is that there seems to be a renewed interest or importance in cross-disciplinary and collaborative research. And this is really where innovation can come to the fore and emerge from areas that were previously unexplored. The next sort of set of bars refer to procedural improvements for initiating research, approving research, and pivoting existing research. They all seem to have improved at the institutional level. What hasn't improved very much for most responders has been government procedures when it comes to distributing research funding. As they say, with crisis comes opportunity, and I think taking all of what I've said into account, there is an opportunity for universities to really rethink their research policies and work with governments to refocus the way that research is funded in Australia. The first thing that needs to be considered is a resetting and aligning of institutional and national research priorities, because with a global pandemic, research priorities change, and there really has to be thought put into what Australia should fund in terms of its research to ensure that the research continues to deliver economic development outcomes. One thing that has been suggested is that areas of strength should really be supported rather than completely new areas or areas where we're less strong. And that's to really maintain quality and reputation and to position Australia as an ongoing attractive destination for new research talent. I've already spoken about the need to support people in terms of their careers, but also we need to include infrastructure, whether that's new infrastructure or maintain the existing infrastructure to remain competitive and an attractive research destination. New strategic partnerships should be looked at, and I'm not just speaking about other institutions, but governments, local, international and so on, as well as industry and society groups really need to be engaged better. There needs to be dedicated support for research translation and impact, because research really is an economic driver and will attract more investment, and that's from public, private and philanthropic sources. And a really interesting thing that needs to be looked at is what emerging interdisciplinary areas have really come to the fore during this COVID situation. Things that you hear about a lot are health systems and artificial intelligence, and the need to have better systems to be ready for future pandemics and disasters, the role of the climate in future disasters, as well as advanced manufacturing technologies. They're just a handful of the things that have really emerged as critical future research priorities for institutions and governments. It's not all doom and gloom, as I say. I'd like to sort of finish this presentation with a little bit more of a positive message, and that's to talk about some of the work that my institution is doing and to give you a little bit of context about where Monash sits in the Australian system. As I mentioned earlier, Monash is one of the largest universities in Australia. It is a member of the group of 8 research-intensive universities and has a very international global outlook, as you'll see. It's identified 4 sort of broad research pillars or priorities, and they are artificial intelligence and data science, better governance and policy, health sciences, and sustainable development. In terms of numbers, we have over 80,000 students from over 160 countries. As I said, about a third of those are international, which is in line with the national figures. There are 4 major campuses in Australia, but we also have campuses in Malaysia, India, China, and an office in Italy. We have formal partnerships with over 100 partner universities. In terms of staff, around 18,000 staff across 10 disciplines, which are listed on the slide. Over 400 million Australian dollars in research income last year, and that's tipped to increase despite everything. The university itself invested about $1 billion into research activities, and our network of alumni is over 400,000 now. So it's a really big university by any means. The faculty I'm from is the Faculty of Medicine, Nursing and Health Sciences, and we're very proud to say that we are #1 in Australia when it comes to attracting publicly funded competitive grants in medical research. So these are grants from our 2 major funding bodies, which are the National Health and Medical Research Council and the Medical Research Future Fund. In terms of the NHMRC, the university has come #1 in Australia for the last 3 years, which we're tremendously proud of, and it's just a real indication of our quality. We've received over $280 million in research income for 2020. That's the forecast to the end of the year, which is an increase from last year. We have 1,500 plus PhD students, which is about a third of the university. We're split across 10 schools at multiple research and clinical sites, primarily through our leadership in Monash Partners, which is an academic health translation centre. It's essentially a partnership between Monash University and the local hospitals. Because of time constraints, I won't go through this slide, but you can see some of our research capabilities there. I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about some of our major activities in the region. Dr. Nazar might have briefed you previously about our work in the United Arab Emirates. So the Faculty of Medicine, Nursing and Health Sciences were engaged by the Ministry of Health and Prevention in the UAE to partner on developing a national health research strategy for the country. So we spent the last 2 or 3 years working with the ministry together with other healthcare authorities and universities in the UAE to come up with a national research strategy and a national framework for the running of research in the UAE, which has been a great project for all of us. We're also very active in IAU University in Saudi Arabia. Our faculty collaborated with the university to co-develop its flagship Bachelor of Medicine curriculum, which has led to an upskilling of the region's healthcare workforce to a very high standard. And we believe that this initiative is going to have flow-on effects to the entire GCC and Middle East region in terms of the quality of healthcare training in one of the region's top universities. I want to spend just a very short period of time talking about some of the COVID projects that we're running at university, at Monash University. We're both working on the basic biology of coronaviruses. We're doing some drug discovery work, diagnostics, vaccine development, but also we're playing a very active role when it comes to contributing to policy decisions and policy advice for government. So what I've shown on this slide is just a selection of some of the projects that have received funding recently from the Australian government to develop new initiatives and technologies when it comes to therapies, diagnostics and vaccines for COVID-19. And these could include the use of convalescent plasma for treatment. There's the novel drugs that we're developing against the ACE2 COVID-19 receptor. There's also Australia's first mRNA COVID-19 vaccine candidate, as well as a rapid detection diagnostic kit. And I'm happy to provide further detail on any of these at a later time. And another thing that we're really proud of is the contribution that our staff have made to the health systems policy and mental health space in terms of the response to COVID. Professor Alan Cheng here, who's from our School of Public Health and Preventive Medicine, is actually Victoria's Deputy Chief Medical Officer, and we see him giving daily press conferences almost very regularly about what's happening in Victoria. And he's also a member of the National Expert Panel, which is advising National Cabinet on COVID-19. Others like Professor Julian Elliott is leading a national COVID-19 task force. Professor Jayashri Kulkarni is leading on developing mental health support programs for frontline workers. And Deborah Griffiths from our School of Nursing has actually led efforts to train our aged care workforce in the use of infection control equipment. And this is incredibly critical because we've gone through a second wave of COVID here in Melbourne, and a very large proportion of those new cases and fatalities have been in our aged care nursing homes. And a lot of that we're finding is because of a lack of training in infection control procedures. So we're very proud of our contribution to the way this COVID situation is resolving in terms of government response. That's where I'll leave it. There's a lot more to talk about when it comes to Monash and when it comes to Australian universities. For those that are interested, I've put a couple of links on the screen, as well as my email address if you would like any further information on anything that I've presented today. And that is where I say thank you to everybody for listening in. And I open the floor to questions, comments, and other general observations. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kovachevich. That was a very informative presentation. Have you stopped sharing the screen just to make sure?
Yes, I have.
Oh, great. Okay, so if I could just, first of all, open the floor to the invited panel made up of Dr. Ahmed, Dr. Bassam, and Dr. Hussam, and see if they have any questions, and then we can move on to the more general audience if they wish to participate, okay? So if I may begin, any of you have any questions? Dr. Ahmed, do you have any questions? Yes, please, go ahead, Dr. Ahmed.
Thank you so much for the presentation. It was interesting, and it's very interesting to see what other people think about the research perspective and how it was impacted by the COVID situation. And I actually agree with you in terms of how COVID negatively impacted research, especially when it comes to research that requires access to labs, access to hospitals, then definitely that's a negative impact. But I'd like also to shed some positive angle on how COVID actually accelerated other types of research. So as a data scientist, for example, we've seen more availability of data related to the COVID situation. This kind of data usually was not published before, and now it's being offered by either governmental agencies or even private companies such as Google and Apple and other companies. Some of them kept this data private in the past. Some of them sold it for a fee, but now is providing it for free for researchers. So I think it's kind of it depends on what area you are working in. Some areas might have actually benefited from the COVID situation in terms of research. What's your take on it?
I absolutely agree. We've had areas of our research effort which have not been greatly impacted at all. So epidemiology and database sciences, which can be done from home, which can be done using databases and so on, have not been greatly affected. Where the main effect has been is people who use wet labs and infrastructure. So the COVID situation has, as you say, opened up a new opportunity for data analysis and data science. And as I said at the start of the presentation, it surprised me how relatively little Australia is investing in mathematics and computing sciences, which is such a fundamental enabling science and a fundamental contributor to basic discovery. It's not the most attractive science when it comes to the public. It's not the most appealing, and it's difficult to show concrete outcomes from maths and computing research, but it's absolutely critical in underpinning the foundation of so many other disciplines. So I totally agree. One area which has thrived this year has been the field of data science and computing. And that's definitely an emerging and growth area in all disciplines, I feel. Digital health is going to be normal. It's going to be common after this, I feel. When here in Australia, many people are visiting their GPs through telehealth and through virtual consultations. That's going to be normal. So digital health and health systems research, I think, is going to be enormous.
Thank you very much for that. Dr. Bassam, Dr. Hassam, either one of you, would you like to jump in with a question or a comment?
Sure, I can
Please.
start. First of all, I would like to apologize for the technical issues I faced when I started the presentation. Thank you for the informative information. My question, COVID-19 is a global crisis and affected everyone. And so what you guys facing in Australia, it's being faced everywhere in Kuwait and other nations as well. Are you aware of any examples of, let's say, government support to research or something that's effective, yet they think it could be replicated in other countries to support scientists and the research community during this crisis?
Well, Australia has dedicated funding for COVID projects. So we've got this sovereign fund called the Medical Research Future Fund, which is a fund which disperses about $500–700 million per year, and much of that funding is discretionary, in the sense that the Minister of Health will work with the research community to identify research priorities and fund them accordingly. It's mission-based, so some of the missions which have been announced so far are mental health, cardiovascular disease, neuroscience, and so on. And there's always a little bit of that money left over for discretionary spending. A lot of that money has gone towards COVID-19 this year, in terms of funding vaccine projects, drug discovery. Several of the projects that I put up on screen at Monash University have been direct beneficiaries of that fund. So I think it's important for governments to have a little bit of money on the side for these sorts of situations, because what's become very clear is that these pandemics need urgent action, and you can't wait years to do something about it. Funding has to be immediate and fast for fast outcomes. Another thing that Australia moved very quickly on was securing access to vaccines, as we mentioned at the start of the session, I think. The Australian government has cut a deal with the Oxford Vaccine Project to supply that vaccine to Australia. But we've also got a couple of very strong local vaccine projects too. The leader at the moment is the University of Queensland, who have shown very, very promising early results.
I'm sorry, maybe I was not clear. You know, I come from a funding agency as well, and yes, the first and natural reaction is to put funding into the crisis, and that's mostly focusing on healthcare and medical research. But what about what you mentioned about the lost generation of, you know, the researchers in other disciplines that now being thought of as not an important thing to focus on? This is what I'm concerned about. How can we, you know, help those people?
Absolutely. I think I made it clear in my presentation that this is an area of policy which really needs attention. Mm-hmm. The effects of COVID-19 are going to be enormous on the workforce. But if kids who are at university don't see a career path, or they get the message that it's not a secure career, they'll be turned away from it. They'll join other disciplines, they'll do other things. Similarly, if you've got early career researchers who are living from grant to grant, and they lose the ability to attract those grants because they have less publications, because they have less time in the lab to do the research, or because governments are funding medical research less in certain areas, they'll drop out, and that sort of talent will be lost. Mm-hmm. So I absolutely agree. This has to be a priority for government. We're really facing a cliff here in terms of losing young talent and attracting young talent. And I think there has to be a specific policy platform to address that. There really isn't one at the moment.
Thank you.
So if I may clarify, what I understand from that is that because the government is spending, let's say, more money and attention on one side of things, it's tipping the balance in that direction, meaning that the ones who are trying to put their efforts into another area of research end up suffering. Is that a fair summary of what you're saying?
It's fair of me to say that public funding for research has been relatively static over the last few years. It's not growing. I mean, the dollar amounts are growing, but not really in line with the cost of research and not really in line with inflation. So because the pool of funding is static, it just gets more and more competitive every year. Okay. Now, that Medical Research Future Fund that I mentioned is a separate fund, but basic research in, say, environmental sciences or astronomy or physics or whatever comes from another fund. But because that fund is static, it just gets more and more competitive each year. And because the government is spending a lot of money supporting the economy and other areas of society because of COVID, there'll be less money that they'll be able to put into those research funds. Okay. So I think everybody's assuming that that fund, the funds for research will either be static or go down. So in that sense, the competitive funding landscape is going to become harder.
Fair enough. Thank you very much for the clarification. Dr. Hassam, do you have any questions or comments?
Yes, I do have three actually.
Okay, please go ahead.
Thank you very much for a very informative presentation. I have two questions actually and a comment maybe. The first one was relevant to what Dr. Bassam asked. I mean, the experience that you showed of Australia and how the fund is allocated, where the student fees seems to be an important input, and it has been affected drastically, and that's what happened. Now, like you said, this model may be something that need to be changed, but from your experience, do you think this is the same model in other countries, or is there other models that are that has been more successful during this crisis? That's the first question. My second question, which is, you know, like, I mean, it's to do with politicians. You know, they always talk about the importance of R&D and innovation as an important driver for economic development. Last year, they gave Nobel Prize for Professor Paul Romer for his work in linking innovation, R&D with economic development, and it showed that more than 2/3 of the economic growth is coming originally from what they call the total productive factor, which is basically technological change and innovation. However, when it comes to crisis, and that's what happened in 2008 as well, when the crisis happens, the most affected sector usually research, innovation, development, which is basically the future. Now, do you think this is something to do with politicians, that they always think of, you know, short-term thinking, that it's, when it's something to do with the future, like what's happening with the climate change and, you know, Donald Trump, you know, because it's sustainability is about, you know, protecting the future, and that's why it's always affected. I'm just raising this issue. The last thing which I liked your conclusion of the presentation, which was positive, and I agree with you, and we've noticed this here in Kuwait, how things have in terms of like I myself send a proposal to KFAS, and was approved. Like everything will happen in no time. Like you said, the red tape issues, a lot of things that we have we've seen that have been like, you know, a lot of barriers have been removed and things went smoothly. So maybe this is something that also not just we talk blaming the government that they need, like, you know, to be generous and improve things, but also maybe our research institutes and universities need to be leaner. We need to collaborate more with the community, so the public aware that this is very important sector for the future of our generations, and also the government. We need to be closer to the government so they appreciate the work that research and academia is doing. And thank you. That's it.
Thank you. You raised some excellent points. Just to refer to the 3 points you made, first of all, you talked about the funding model and the reliance on students. Australia essentially doesn't have a limit on the number of international students they could bring in. So a lot of universities saw that as an opportunity to grow. And in a sense, we've become overly reliant on that opportunity. So really moving forward, the funding sources have to be diversified. We can't put all of our eggs in one basket, as they say. We have to look at things like philanthropy better, industry funding, leveraging funding from international sources, you know, the big ones like Wellcome Trust or the Bill Gates Foundation. We just have to look broader and more further than just relying on a smaller number of funding sources. And it touches on that point I was making earlier about the static funding situation from the Australian government. We just have to look elsewhere to fund research. Your second point on political vision and the tendency of decision makers to think more short term rather than long term. Unfortunately, that's a side effect of the political cycle. Here in Australia, we have a new prime ministerial election every 4 years, and it's unusual to sort of hear about policies that go too far beyond that, at least ones that are taken seriously or seen long term, with all apologies and respect to His Excellency on screen. It's a problem, I think, for political decision makers, because long-term vision is something that doesn't guide a lot of politicians. They're more interested in counting votes, you know, and it's a very simplistic way to look at it. You know, there are good people in politics, but they need to stand up and show vision and leadership, and convince people that these sort of things are important and an investment in the future. And your third point about red tape, absolutely agree that institutions could be leaner. There's a lot of bureaucracy that could be looked at and made more efficient. And that really was the heart of our project with the United Arab Emirates, to be honest, because one of our major findings in that project was that the different emirates that make up the country weren't really talking to each other as closely as they should. They weren't collaborating as closely as they should, and they operated under different rules and regulations. So what we suggested to them was to start singing from the same book, follow the same rules, follow the same processes, follow the same guidelines and expectations for carrying out research. And that will improve collaboration between institutions, between different parts of the country, between government, industry, academia, and the end users of research, society. So there's a lot of things you can do. And Dr. Hassam, you raised some very big points there, and I'm not sure that a few minutes is enough to give them proper space. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you for that, Your Excellency. Gilbert, would you like to retort or rebut?
No. I think the points about Australia's electoral cycle, 3 years, not 4, but and three makes it only more difficult. So no need to retort that. But I actually have a question for the Kuwaiti panelists. I mean, I've been watching, interestingly, KFAS's response to COVID and KISS, but KFAS particularly. I saw quite quickly that new funding rounds were put out, particularly in the health science space. I'm not particularly clear, and I'd be interested to get a bit of a sense of what is the existing kind of framework for funding for health research here in Kuwait, noting that it does seem that KFAS has allocated a specific amount of money to quite quickly stand up some projects in this area. So, yeah, interested in A, what's the existing framework of health science funding here in Kuwait, and B, anything more on KFAS's efforts, because from a distance I was watching and I was impressed about how quickly it was mobilized, but I'd be interested to hear a little bit more about that story. Thank you.
Sure.
Thanks. Dr. Bassam?
Yeah, KFAS thought that it's very critical to respond to the crisis as soon as possible. And the way we reacted, we wanted to be inviting to the local research community to contribute to finding solutions to some of the challenges that the country is facing because of the crisis. So yeah, we allocated, actually in a way, we put a hold on our normal activities, and we refocused our resources into a program we launched. We called it the Emergency Resilience Program. And within this program, we issued call for proposals in areas that we thought of a priority to the country. And we tried to be as accommodating as possible to proposals. However, one of the things we faced is also the slow response from the community, the scientific community side, because many reasons. I mean, the country was in total shutdown, so all the research institutions were in shutdown. The researchers had difficulty submitting proposals because it has to go through the official channel within their institutions, and if they're not working, then it was difficult for them to submit proposals. So we saw a drop in number of proposals, and we were hoping to have more. But other than that, we're very flexible and open to accommodate proposals. And as Dr. Hassam mentioned, it was very fast when he submitted his proposal to get the decision to on his proposal. So in a way, we're trying to be accommodating and flexible as much as possible with the way we can support the local research community to come up with solutions to the challenges we face here in Kuwait.
Anybody else? Any other questions? Yes, Dr. Ahmed, please go ahead.
Yeah, so from what we heard, like it seems that there has been a redistribution of priorities, and more funds are now, research funds are allocated to healthcare kind of research. And that might have a negative impact on other areas. But my question at the same time is, some people would say that the healthcare research was underfunded in the first place. So now we realize not just research, even the healthcare sector as overall, like it has been underfunded. And now we have realized the importance of investing in the healthcare sector and healthcare research to avoid situations like what happened right now. So maybe we need to increase the pie to not neglect the other areas of research. But would you agree that perhaps this increased attention toward the healthcare research sector is actually deserved?
As a healthcare research person myself, yes, it's deserved. Of course, I'm going to support more money for medical research. Look, I think one of the positive side effects of the COVID situation is that society and the population at large, which previously might have been underinformed or less observant of what's going on in health research, have realised what an absolutely fundamental role it plays in national security, in society, in the economy, in mental health and everything. It'd be foolish to think that we are not going to ever have another pandemic, even in our lifetime, as human mobility increases, as previously rural areas become urbanized, as the climate changes, new pathogens are going to emerge. And I'm personally convinced that there'll be at least another pandemic in my lifetime. The question is, are we going to be better ready for it next time? And there have to be a lot of lessons learned from COVID. One of those is to fund medical research and medical research talent properly, but also, as you say, not to neglect other disciplines, because it's all interdisciplinary. One thing we've noticed at Monash is that we've got COVID projects in the most unexpected places. School of Architecture is doing a project where they're looking at building design and better ventilation. You've got social projects, you've got economic modelling, and I've spoken at length about data and computer science and the role it can play in digital health. This is an interdisciplinary problem. And I would hope that once this is all over and that governments restore their financial positions, that the value of research to society is better recognised, because we've experienced it now and we don't want to live through this again. So that's my wishful thinking.
Absolutely spot on. We have time for one more. If anybody would like to ask or expand on anything that they've heard. Anybody? Okay, then. It leaves me just... Yeah.
Sorry.
No, please go ahead, Your Excellency. Go ahead.
Just wanted to thank KISA, KFAS, all the participants for hosting today and the initiative. I mean, Monash is a terrific institution. I encourage you all to kind of reach out, not just in the health science space, but across all of its faculties. I mean, for KFAS, along with the Director General of KISA, we took down Mohammed Ramadan to Australia, down to see some of Australian institutions, and I think he was very impressed. There is an incredible array of experts in Australia, multidisciplinary, whatever you want. So feel free to reach out to us here at the Embassy. Feel free to reach out to Nazar and Svet at Monash. There is a wonderful body of Australian researchers back there that I encourage KFAS and KISA to tap into.
Thank you very much. Much appreciated. And I have to say that, we've been doing this for a little bit now, and thanks to you and your amazing staff and your amazing network, this has been one of the smoothest logistically that we've had to face. So thank you very much for keeping on top of things and being very cooperative, and we hope to build on that in the future as well. So thank you very much, Your Excellency. I'd like to thank Dr. Kovachevich one more time for taking the time to come out here and and give his take on the impacts of COVID on innovation and research. A special thanks, of course, to our panel of experts, Dr. Hassam, Dr. Ahmed, and Dr. Bassam. Your input has been great as always and very invaluable. And we look forward to hosting you all again on a future installment of the KIC series. So thank you all very much once again. And this is Dr. Bassam signing off. Till next time. Stay safe.
Thank
everybody.
you. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you for watching this installment of the KIC series. And remember, you can keep up to date with our webinars by subscribing below. Looking forward to seeing you all again very soon. Stay tuned, stay safe.